Good evening, friends. It's the 30th of October, and today we'll cover two small topics. First of all, yesterday's attack by Ukrainian drone, sea and air drones supplied by the UK, along with assistance by UK and aviation and control by an American Predator that was flying at the edge of Russian territory. And what did they target? They targeted the ships that were carrying or that were escorting the grain convoy ships out of Odessa. The funny part, of course, is the Ukrainians are such morons. They're using the money off of this to, quote, feed the world, even though the vast majority of those ships are going to Europe, to feed Europe and keep prices high. So most of the world is still going to starve thanks to Western basic theft. They're lowering the prices for themselves by screwing the actually really poor countries. But okay, that's okay, because Europe's about to become one of those really poor continents full of really poor countries. Welcome to the third world, so you're staving it off just a little for the regular famines. But the difference is, the famines in Europe are going to be, products will be on the shelves, will just be too expensive to afford. The famines in the other countries, like North Africa, are going to be no food. At least the ones that were foolish enough to buy from Ukraine. Because, again, none of that went to them. All got taken up by American and European dealers. Of course, all those people are going to be heading right into Europe and into the European collapsing economy, society, ecology. And they were attacked, by the way, launched from ships, apparently from ships that were transporting Ukrainian flagships that were transporting the grain. So you gotta love that. And then the piggies in Kiev and their little and the limey backup they have in London are now screaming, "Oh, Russia's weaponizing grain." Yeah, like they say, the thief always yells thief loudest in the market. So, anyways, no more convoys. But Russia is giving out 500,000 tons of grain to poor countries to feed them. That's what actually countries that actually want to help somebody, that's what they do. They don't swipe everything up and put it on max prices on grain exchanges so they can make as much money as possible while literally millions will starve to death. That's the Anglo approach. We're not Anglos, thank God. We'll give away 500,000 tons of grain to the poorest, and then sell a good chunk of more to slightly richer countries at discounted rates, not the market rate. God has given us a record harvest this year, well over 150 million tons of grain. So we're not going to starve. Europe's going to starve. Europe's going to shit, but they deserve it, and they made it. That's what happens when you're spineless. And on the notes of being spineless, we'll come to our second topic of spineless Europe. In this case, Poland and the girl band that runs Finland. So you got two sets of idiots. Well, at least Poles actually want to gobble up Western Ukraine. So they do have some kind of plan to actually make themselves a bit richer, or at least land-wise. Of course, then they're going to have to deal with the Una types that they helped recreate. And I hope we ship weapons to those guys so they can have a nice civil war in Poland. There's few people that more deserve that than the Poles for everything that they've done to create this catastrophe that we now have in Eastern Europe. And but anyway, so they in Finland are asking to have nuclear weapons staged on their territories. So Poland at least is possibly getting Western Ukraine out of this. They've already gotten Zelensky, the non-Ukrainian Zelensky, has already signed a document giving Poles special treatment and status in Ukraine. Because Poles, if you don't know this, can now hold any office in Ukraine without ever being a Ukrainian citizen. Just being a Polish citizen. And Polish police can now work anywhere in Ukraine under Polish law. Interesting. That makes Ukraine what? A colony at best. It's not even a vassal state at this point. It's just a territory with steadily depopulating territory for the Poles to repopulate. But putting nuclear weapons in Poland and putting nuclear weapons in Finland, and we'll get to Finland in a minute, Makes them what? Oh, that makes them nuclear targets. And since these weapons are designed first and foremost to deny Russia the ability to have any time to figure out what's going on. So in other words, a first strike capability. They are getting placed, so they are, especially for Finland, they're about 500 kilometers, 600 kilometers from Moscow. Oh no, I'm sorry, 500 miles. So that's about 700 kilometers from Moscow. Flight time, since that's the slowest part of a ballistic missile is the liftoff, the actual flight time at that point, you're only adding a couple of minutes from what it was earlier. So, or subtracting, let me phrase that, a couple of minutes. So basically, you're looking at best, it's for first strike. And since neither Finland nor Warsaw will ever control these, they'll be controlled by the U.S. and only the U.S. I mean, the reality of it. NATO, but it's the U.S., the Biden administration, and its band of psychopathic Satanists. Poland and Finland will get out of this nuclear craters. Because at this point, you are now posing an existential threat to Russia. Think about that one. Short of us putting nuclear weapons in Cuba, Venezuela, and maybe Mexico, the alternative is literally is a first strike from the Russian side to stop the American first strike. That's how logic runs. Now we go to Finland, even without nuclear weapons and soon to have Helsinki as a big nuclear crater. Finland, which was once part of the Russian Empire. Finland, which is a backwater, it was always a backwater. Helsinki was a dirty little nasty smelly fishing village until the Russian Empire built it into a metropolitan city. So everything there was more, well, for the 1800s and the 1900s it was built by Russia. And then the Finns, when they became independent, they started building up additionally. But the interesting thing is, until Finland became part of the Russian Empire, Finns never ruled Finland. They were part of, they were backwater of Sweden, that the Swedes went in there if they ever wanted to rape and pillage without having to go past their own borders. They did a little rape and pillaging on the Finns. Everything was run by Swedes, and the Finns were at best a third-rate pseudo-humanity to serve the superior Swedes. So when Finland became part of the Russian Empire, Finns got education. They got construction projects. They became part of the Russian aristocracy, and one Finn by the name of Mannerheim actually became a field marshal. Not to mention there were plenty of Finns that were in other posts in the Russian Empire, because they were allowed to progress. But for that, we, as usual, get from these types, these little pseudo-nations, we get usually some kind of Russophobia coming back at us. But Finland was doing well after the Russo-Finnish War, which itself was over what? Finland grabbed a bunch of Russian land during the Russian Civil War when it broke away. And the whole point was it was threatening the bays coming into St. Petersburg. And even Mannerheim at that point said, just give them the land, and they're willing to give us land, a lot more land in return, give them the land. But no, the Finnish Russophobes that were in power wanted war. They got war. Yes, they at first they did well because the Russian, Soviet military was very disorganized. But once they got reorganized, they get their asses handed to them. So World War II kicks off a couple of years later. They do their continuation war. They march into Karelia, trying to annex all of Karelia and double the size of Finland. And they set up extermination camps and concentration camps for Russians. Yeah, that's one of those things that doesn't get mentioned. They get their asses handed to them in 1944, but they're allowed to have a secure peace as long as they're going to be neutral. Into perpetuity. That's what the document said. Into perpetuity. Perpetuity, as far as I understand that, is infinity. It's not to 2021, 2022. It's into infinity. Finland, the entire economy of Finland was tied up with Russia. Not only was it just Russian gas, Finland's number one export is boards. That's like lumber. The raw lumber they were buying from Russia. We were losing what we would have been selling as boards to help the Finns, selling them just raw lumber. And that was, they were making off of lumber sales what Saudi Arabia and proportionally the economics makes off of oil sales. Their entire best part of their economy is coming from lumber sales. They don't make a lot of things in Finland. They're not exactly an agricultural power. It's mostly swamp and forest. They do like a lot of hamburgers, which they have to import the beef for. They do fishing. They do that. What else have they got in Finland? They had the best airline companies because they flew. They were a good stopover. They flew through Russia, and they were a good stopover to go to Moscow. Cheap and decently well staffed, even though no food or anything like that for free with your regular tickets. You have to keep paying for it, but that's the European trend, anyways. Yeah, Finnair is basically bankrupt right now. It's gotten rid of half of its planes and firing people left and right because guess what? Finland can't fly over Russia anymore. And it can't fly into Russia anymore. Counter sanctions for the Finns closing its airspace to Russian flights. Okay, we can do that. Problem is nobody needs Finland up God knows where in the north unless you're flying to Russia or through Russia to Asia. And since everything going to Asia that is European has to be routed south an extra of almost 1,000 kilometers and is no longer market oriented compared to its competitors. It's not competitive. None of the Europeans are competitive anymore. And heading to Asia. The Asian companies are very competitive. They keep flying through Russian airspace. Yeah, sanctions. Well, Finnair is basically bankrupt. They fired half their people, sold off a bunch of their planes, or returned them to the leasing companies. They're just standing around while pay a lease on them. And most of the Finnish economy, which also bought, it bought a lot of its manufactured goods that it made cheeses and things like that, like Viola. Its main market was Russia. It brought from Russia lots of other goods. And tourism there and back was a big clinching pin in their economy. In fact, their entire tourist industry is basically based off of Russians. And the Finns came into Russia to buy discount products all the time into St. Petersburg or Leningrad Oblast, in this case, and in Karelia. They're buying everything from cigarettes and vodka, because the biggest drunks in St. Petersburg are always the Finns, to everyday goods. And vice versa with traffic coming in, especially Russians that were getting Schengen visas for Europe through Finland. They would have to come into Finland to activate those visas, so they go in there and they do shopping sprees, 4 6-hour shopping sprees. On buses, and yeah, so the Finns their economy was clinched on that. But the Finns, being the progressives that they are, put their little party girl president and her little party girl entourage into power. And guess what happens when you put a bunch of 30-somethings party girls into power? You get a collapsed economy, you get mass inflation, you get energy that's too expensive and not enough of it, you get closed what little industry you have. You get the best airline company in Europe going bankrupt. And all in half a year. That's got to be a record. But now, just to top it off, you get nuclear weapons stationed on Finland, making Finland a nuclear target. Yeah, well, when you're somebody's strumpet, you got to be able to take it on your back, because that's where you're going to be. And the Finnish people, you don't deserve much better than what you're going to get, because you put these types of idiots into power. You voted them. You felt good about being progressive. You felt powerful that you've moved forward. There's a reason 30-somethings, and it's only 30-something party girls aren't normally in power. The last time you had a 30-something power party girl next to power was Marie Antoinette. And we kind of know how that all landed. Let them eat cake. Go with God.